I saw many strange things in the small Russian town of Chereshki. Some of them are impossible to forget, even though I now live as far away from that place as possible. This story happened long ago, when I moved from my parents' house to a rented apartment. It was my first independent living space. To say that I was excited is to say nothing at all. It was close to my work and so cheap. Suspiciously cheap, now that I think about it, but back then, I felt lucky that I found this perfect, affordable place. On moving day, I stood on the ground floor landing, wondering which of my belongings to take upstairs first. It was a standard 5-story apartment building constructed in the Khrushchev era, a concrete paneled box with rows of identical rectangular windows, dull colors, straight lines, and no creative details whatsoever. There was no elevator, and of course, my new apartment happened to be on the top floor. Thankfully, I didn't have much stuff, a large suitcase and a cardboard box with a few books and kitchen utensils. It meant only 2 trips up the narrow, dimly lit stairs. It could have been worse. As I grabbed the handle of my suitcase, the entrance door creaked open, and a tall man with tousled hair and a big messy beard stepped inside. He looked glum. His head was lowered slightly, shoulders hunched as if he was carrying a heavy invisible burden on his back. He glanced at me sullenly from under his bushy graying eyebrows and walked towards the stairs. After taking a few steps, he stopped inside wearily. "Need help?" He had a deep voice, like Santa might have. A very sad, exhausted Santa. "Well, yeah, why not?" I said, pleasantly surprised at the offer. "Thank you." He picked up my box and started up the stairs. I followed, awkwardly dragging the suitcase up one step at a time. The higher I got, the heavier it seemed. "Which floor?" "5th." Grunting, I put my load down, stepped up without looking, and almost crashed into the man's back as he froze, rooted to the spot in the middle of the flight. "Apartment 17? He asked quietly without turning around. "Yeah. Just moving in." I felt a little confused. Why did he stop all of a sudden? He paused for a moment longer, then continued his way up the stairs, shoulders even more hunched than before. I stared at his back, suddenly nervous at the thought that he now knew where I lived. I immediately reproached myself for being paranoid, but he seemed determined to worsen my suspicions. "You look young," he muttered. "Are you a student?" I began to wonder if accepting the help of a stranger was such a good idea. "No, but I work at the university." I looked for a way to get rid of him while remaining polite and friendly. "I don't mind if you leave the box on your floor. I can handle it from there. I live in apartment 18. "Oh." That was the only thing I could say. On the 5th floor, he put the box at my doorstep and gazed at me sorrowfully, which only made me more uncomfortable. It felt like he knew something depressing about me, a feeling that I couldn't understand and certainly disliked. I didn't want to look ungrateful, though. "Well, thank you very much." I smiled and held out my hand. "You practically saved me." It was an exaggeration, but I was desperate to dispel the unsettling atmosphere. He scratched his wild beard, frowning at my hand. For an agonizing moment, I felt like a complete fool, confident that he wouldn't shake it, but then he did. His palm felt warm and rough, his grip firm but gentle. He turned to the door with the number 18 on it, fumbling with his keys. The lock clicked, and bright sunlight burst into the dark landing from his apartment. "What's your name?" he asked over his shoulder, crossing the threshold. I couldn't find a way to avoid answering his question without sounding rude. "Paulina. And yours?" "Petrovich." He gave me one last somber look. "I'm very sorry, Paulina." The door slammed shut. I was left staring at it blankly. Then I reckoned, living in an apartment building, you must have at least one weird neighbor, and put all this interaction out of my head. Unfortunately, my acquaintance with Petrovich wasn't the only unpleasant thing that day. I soon found out that my landlady had left a lot of her things in the apartment: clothes in the wardrobe, shoes beside the front door, makeup supplies on the kitchen table. There was even a well-used toothbrush standing in a glass in the bathroom. This was rather unexpected, since we agreed that the place would be empty for my moving day. I tried to call my landlady but had no luck. Finally, I just dumped her stuff in an old armchair to make room for my belongings and decided to deal with it tomorrow. Maybe she'd answer my calls or come and take her things. It was an exhausting day, and all I wanted to do was crawl into bed and sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, acutely aware that something was wrong. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. Everything seemed normal on the surface. As normal as it could be at 3 a.m., anyway. I hadn't shut the curtains before going to bed, and now pale moonlight was pouring into the room, causing the armchair with all my landlady's stuff in it to cast a strange shadow across the floor. Odd blurry shapes were peeping out of the ajar doors of the massive wardrobe. The doorway to the hall was dark and empty. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Just a quiet night. Then I finally saw her. The window was on the right side. It started at the bed's footboard and took up almost the entire wall to the far right corner. That was where she was standing, her left side partially obscured by the now still curtain. A short, hunched figure in a white floor-length nightgown. She looked old. Much older than my granny, who was about 70 at the time. One of her bony arms that wasn't hidden behind the curtain hung motionless along her gaunt body, long fingers were crooked at impossible angles. Her thin gray hair fell to her sharp bare shoulder, limp and lifeless. Her small, almost lipless mouth was slightly open as if she was trying to breathe through it. Only, I wasn't sure she was breathing at all. She stood utterly unmoving and silent, staring at me with huge foggy eyes that were unnaturally round and bulging. She didn't blink, not even once. The draft from outside fluttered the curtain again, and the fabric touched her hollow cheek. She didn't flinch, her gaze still fixed on me. I froze for a second. My first thought was that I had sleep paralysis. I'd only had it once before, when I was a kid. That time, it was a bunch of aliens performing surgery on my stomach. The result of watching too much X-Files, I believe. But this time was different. I soon found out that I could move. In fact, I could move very well. With an audible gasp, I practically jumped up into a sitting position and crawled backwards until my shoulder blades were safely pressed against the headboard of the bed. Frozen with horror, I jerked my knees up to my chin in an unconscious attempt to move as far away from the old woman as possible. I crushed the bedsheet beneath me, the blanket slid down, exposing my bare legs to the cool night air. I didn't care. My eyes focused on the figure behind the curtain. I feared that when she saw me moving, she would react, rush forward, scream, do something horrifying, but she didn't. She just stood there staring, and for some reason, her simple inaction made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. No matter what she looked like, she was definitely not an ordinary old woman. I almost suffocated from the feeling that something unimaginable, something otherworldly was watching me in the darkness. Out of habit, I reached for the bedside lamp, but almost immediately remembered that I'd left it in my parents' house, in my old bedroom which would now be turned into a guest room. The only light source here was a large pendant on the ceiling, and its switch was in the far left corner by the doorway to the hall. I wouldn't dare run across the room past the terrifying old woman. Without taking my eyes off the creature behind the curtain, I began to fumble around for my phone. I remembered that I dropped it on the bed somewhere next to the pillow before falling asleep. Mobile phones were much different back then. There were no touch screens or internet connection. Most didn't even have a flashlight function. I was lucky, mine had one. I breathed a sigh of relief as my fingers finally touched the familiar smooth plastic. The old woman was still staring at me from the corner, the whites of her eyes glistening in the moonlight. I only realized how much my hands were shaking when I tried to press the C button. My thumb hit it several times and slipped. The flashlight blinked and went out. The old woman wasn't still anymore. "Hello," throaty growl escaped her mouth, and she moved. She moved so fast, faster than any living thing I'd ever seen. One moment she was standing in the corner, the next she was grabbing the footboard with one hand, long pointed nails scratching the wood. Her wrinkled gray face was so close now, mouth wide open, eyes bulging. She leaned forward, her other hand reaching for my ankle. A second longer and her clawed fingers would have sunk into my skin. I shrieked. My thumb pushed the C button down so hard it squeaked. I pointed the beam of light right at the creature's face. All of a sudden, she was gone. I sat there panting and shaking, blood thundering in my ears. I frantically shone my flashlight into every corner of the room, the ceiling, the walls, the doorway. She was nowhere to be seen. I even turned around to look at the headboard and the wall behind it. Nothing. My thumb on the C button started to ache. After what felt like an eternity, I took a deep breath and made a mad dash for the light switch. The entire time, I expected sharp claws to grab me, pierce my neck, rip out my heart. I can't even describe the enormous wave of relief that swept over me as warm yellow light filled the room. I stood by the door to the hallway, my back against the wall, hand on the light switch, every muscle tense. My own frightened reflection looked at me from the window on the opposite wall. I was alone. A loud knock on the front door startled me. Was it real, or was it part of the supernatural nightmare, the old woman's trick to scare me even more? Someone knocked again. more insistently this time. I heard a muffled male voice coming from the landing. It was impossible to tell what they were saying, but I thought they sounded more concerned than menacing, like a real person. With trembling hands, I opened the door. "You're all right." Petrovich didn't ask, he just stated the fact. He stood on the landing, looking exactly like your stereotypical alcoholic neighbor Uncle Vasya, chest hair curling above the neckline of his greasy tank top, soiled sweatpants bagging at the knees, a big toe peeking out of a hole in his worn-out slipper. He was a real living person. I held back the urge to hug him. "I saw something," I said. "An old woman." "I know. Heard you screaming." Petrovich scratched his beard. "You tried to turn on the lights, didn't you?" "What?" He sighed and scratched his beard some more. "For the future, turn on the lights before dusk and turn them off after dawn. She won't show up. If you forget, then just don't try to turn them on until the sun rises. She doesn't like it. She won't touch you in the dark, she'll just watch." "For the future? I'm outta here first thing in the morning," I exclaimed. "Course you are." Petrovich ruefully shook his head. "I told Lenka to find someone older, someone close to their deathbed, to pass this thing on to." He shuffled towards his apartment. Lenka was my landlady's short name. "Hey! Wait a minute." I started after him, the concrete floor cold and dusty under my bare feet. I was too agitated to let a minor discomfort stop me. Petrovich entered his apartment, then turned, holding the door, and looked at me. "Don't you dare say you're sorry." I pointed my finger at him angrily. He just nodded and sighed. There was this deep sadness in his eyes. "I can't help you, Paulina," he said. "You can trick someone into sleeping the night in your place. Let them see her, make her their problem. Find someone old enough so they won't suffer long, and when they die, they'll take her with them." "What?" I blinked stupidly at him. I'm not proud of myself for not being particularly bright in that situation, but at the time, all I got from our brief conversation was that Petrovich knew a lot about this old woman. It made me angrier. Petrovich sighed again and suddenly pulled his door shut. "Hey! Open up." I banged on his door for a while, but he never opened it. I kept the lights on until well after sunrise and moved out of the cursed apartment as soon as I could. I couldn't get through to my landlady. I never saw her again. Now I live far away from Cherashki in a nice small apartment with plenty of light sources in my bedroom. I got used to sleeping with lights on. It's not that hard if you find a good sleep mask. But every once in a while, a strong wind knocks down a tree in the neighborhood and the power goes out. Just like that, she's there again. Behind the curtain. She stands still, watching me in the dark.